Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 332 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 10 of tomorrow. And we'll go in just a second. There are going to be a couple of announcements at the end as well. Here we go. She noticed that Sarah and all the other police were overweight, except for their leader, who seemed to simply be muscular. She hadn't really seen any overweight people before in her town. A few people had a few pounds around the middle, but there just wasn't enough food to get seriously heavy. But Sarah was almost pushing her off the front of the saddle. That wouldn't have bothered her, except the carpenters were all thin to the point of starvation. Where were the people of average weight on the mainland? They plodded north along the trail. As they crested a hill, Betty's breath caught. Ahead of them, though still far off, was a whole forest of buildings. Tall beyond tall, they rose into the sky. Betty had read about skyscrapers and had seen a few tallish buildings in the ruined city by her town. These stunned her. But even from this distance, she could see there were broken windows marring what would otherwise be mirror-like sides to the structures. Sarah, behind her, chuckled. Now you know what a real civilization looks like. But there could be no one living in these structures, Betty thought. Too dangerous, with no maintenance for decades. So whose civilization was she crowing about? They inched closer and closer, and soon were starting to ride between a number of houses. Some of these, Betty thought, looked lived in, though none seemed particularly well maintained. Even the worst maintained houses from her town looked in better shape than the best maintained of these. And these houses, like her town's, were clearly pre-inundation. They were still close to the sea, and as with her hometown on the island, this area showed the effects of the inundation, with roads going straight down into the water, disappearing under the water's poles, half drowned in seawater, and buildings dangerously close to being swept away, and others still partly sticking out of the water where they were removed by the encroaching waters. The buildings got closer and closer together as they rode. Soon they were inside what would have been a huge, sprawling city. All of the buildings here, as far as Betty could tell without being able to go up to them, were disused, empty, and crumbling. But that didn't surprise her too much. After all, her town was a small slice of a once large city itself, and outside of the area that her town had maintained, the buildings were similarly decrepit. But as they continued to ride, it did surprise her that she didn't see any little built-up towns yet, places where people had carved out little areas to keep things going and live together. Instead, it was block after block, then mile after mile, of houses with broken glass and sagging roofs. She wasn't used to riding, and her butt was starting to hurt. But she didn't bother to say anything. What good would complaining to Sarah or her other captors do? Eventually, they approached a wall. It was tall, flat, and made of long planks of graying wood, and Betty guessed it was post-inundation. They advanced on the wall, and someone opened the large metal gate as they approached. It was made of large bars of iron, somehow fastened together, and looked as strong as anything Betty had ever seen that had been fashioned after the inundation. The wall was not part of some building or compound, she saw as they entered. Apparently an entire section of city had been walled off. Betty wondered if it was meant as fortification, a prison, or something else. They continued into the area. There were houses here, pre-inundation, certainly, and maintained, but still shabby. The windows were often broken and not repaired with replacement glass, but simply filled in with plastic sheeting or wood. The roofs were repaired, but not with any eye towards making it look good. Rather, it was repaired only with an eye for keeping the weather out. But he wondered why the people here seemed only to have an eye for practicalities with no desire to make things look attractive. And still they rode. The huge wall was no longer visible, but with no other wall in sight, Betty supposed the entire area was one large enclosed neighborhood, or even city. And that's the end of the story for this week. I do have a couple of announcements, as I mentioned. So one thing is that you might have noticed the last couple of episodes, I haven't been saying CryptoBiography LLC at the end of the episodes, copyright. Instead, just saying Brandon Starr. Well, I finally dropped the LLC company. It didn't seem to be doing very much. So originally when I was doing CryptoBiography, it was about, the idea was to interview people and talk about their lives. And, there was some chance that some sort of, legal protection might be needed and might be helpful to have be enclosed within a, corporation. But, since I have long since switched to fiction, and it's all, based on my own writing, and there's not really a lot of things that can go wrong legally with that. I decided to finally drop the LLC. So now it's just going to say copyright Brandon Starr from here on out. One other announcement is that I am going to be on vacation, so there's going to be a couple of episodes coming up here, and I plan on doing what I do the other times where I've been away, and that is to take older stories and combine them into, one longer episode. So instead of writing and, as I write and then read it out while I'm making the stories, I'll go back to one of the older stories, combine it into usually one episode, although for very long stories I will sort of break it up into potentially 2 or more episodes. But the idea is to make it a little more digestible for people, and also give them a chance to go back to older stories without having to hunt back 200 episodes or whatever. So that will be happening for a couple 3 episodes here in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll go from there. And then we'll be back. Obviously, I'll have to continue this story, so there's going to be kind of a big gap here, between this part of the story and the next part. Sorry about that, but we'll do the best we can with it. Thank you for listening. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter or Mastodon. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2023 Brandon Starr. All rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.